Welcome to our January edition of Art Together at Home. During this session, we will be making our own paper quilt squares inspired by the exhibition Stitching Time, the Social Justice Collaboration Quilts Project, which is currently on view at the Zimmerli Art Museum. What words come to mind when you think of quilts? Perhaps you think of being cozy on a snow day, or maybe women sewing in a circle together. Maybe you think of storytelling and family history. Or you could be the one that thinks of patterns, geometry, measuring, and cutting. Regardless of what you imagine, all quilts tell a story, and all quilts are labors of love. With that in mind, let's look at 3 quilts currently on view in the exhibition Stitching Time, the Social Justice Collaboration Quilts Project. This exhibition explores the connection between imprisoned quilters at the Louisiana State Penitentiary and free quilters. After we explore the meaning of these quilts and some techniques and patterns used to make them, you'll be able to go ahead and create your own quilt square out of paper. Designed by the Louisiana State Penitentiary Hospice Quilters, this first quilt, Love, is all about friendship, love, and caring for one another. A group of inmates decided to start a hospice program for their fellow inmates who were sick and dying. In order to fund the program and buy basic necessities, the inmates started making and selling quilts. The hospice quilters chose to use cheerful colors and patterns on this quilt. They included a handful of hearts made from different fabrics and added the word love to really embody the mission of their group and the hospice program. Eventually, one of the hospice quilters, a man named Kenya, and his friend Maureen Kelleher, also a quilter, founded the Social Justice Collaboration Quilts Project. This project supports artists who work behind prison walls and celebrates the voices of imprisoned and free quilters alike. These next 2 quilts were designed by Kenya and assembled and hand-quilted by Maureen. This quilt, called The Masks, is a celebration of the cultures and vibrancy of different African nations. Kenya is fascinated by African masks and chose the colors, fabrics, patterns, and textures to highlight the nations that he thought had the most beautiful masks. Kenya drew the designs out onto paper, transferred them to fabric, and made the individual pieces of the quilt. Then Maureen assembled the pieces all together and did the hand quilting. This quilt uses a couple common patterns, including the 9-patch and the flying geese, both of which you can see in the detail image on this slide. The 9-patch is a popular pattern when you want to use up every scrap of fabric. It is a pattern that is quick to put together and was initially used on quilts that were intended more for warmth than decoration. Over time, though, it has maintained its popularity. The other pattern, the flying geese, consists of a triangle within a rectangle. When several of these are placed next to each other, they resemble a flock of geese flying in the sky. This quilt, Red, White, and Baldwin, is Kenya's way to honor James Baldwin, an American writer, activist, and champion of free speech. Again, Kenya designed this quilt on paper, transferred it to fabric, and then had Maureen assemble and do the hand quilting. Kenya chose all different colors of fabric and combined them into a log cabin pattern. The log cabin pattern, which you can see on the detail image here, is a symbol of home, love, safety, and security. Each piece of fabric revolves around the central square, sewn together in a similar way to stacking logs to build a cabin. Between these log cabin squares are portraits of James Baldwin. On the squares featuring James Baldwin's image, you can still see a hint of the log cabin pattern, except this time Baldwin is at the center. This strategy allows James Baldwin to serve as the anchor for those particular quilt squares, driving home the importance of him as an activist and his importance to Kenya and to American history. While our quilt squares will be made out of paper, Real quilts are made from all different types of fabric and sewn into many types of traditional patterns. Quilt patterns often have specific meanings behind them and reflect what is important to the quilter, their family, or the recipient. Quilts tell different stories, as you can see from the 3 that we have looked at. Now it's your turn to make your own quilt square out of paper using whatever colors and patterns you like. Your quilt can tell a story, celebrate your favorite colors, represent your family or something else you care about. Whatever your quilt looks like, that's up to you. If you want to take it up a notch, perhaps everyone in your family can design a square, and then you can put them together to make a family quilt. Here's a list of the supplies that you'll need to complete this activity. Cardboard or cardstock, cut into a square, that can serve as the backing for your quilt pieces. A glue stick, pencil, a ruler. It can be helpful when you're trying to cut out straight lines. Several sheets of paper in different colors. I have orange and yellow here. I also have a piece of patterned paper. You can use wrapping paper as well, or pieces from magazines or newspaper. Scissors, and a scrap paper which you might want to use for brainstorming, so you can figure out what your quilt square will look like before you start cutting all the pieces of paper. The first step is to cut and sketch, so make sure that your cardstock or cardboard is cut into a square, and then you're going to sketch out the pattern that you want to use, or whatever design you envision, onto that square. This will give you an idea of where to place the pieces of colored paper as you move forward. Step 2. Now it's time for colored paper and cutting paper. So I hope you chose whatever colors and patterns of paper you want to use for your quilt square, because now you're going to go ahead and start cutting those pieces into the shapes to lay on top of your cardboard or cardstock backing. Step 3. Time to arrange and glue your square. So you're going to lay all of your cutout shapes where they go on your square piece of cardboard or cardstock, and then you can go ahead and start gluing them into place. A glue stick works great, but if you have liquid glue or tape, you can use that too. Here's a few additional options or suggestions that might help you out while you're making your quilt square. If you don't have colored paper, you can do this activity with white paper and markers, crayons, or colored pencils, even watercolor or paint if you want to. You can attach your quilt squares to others made by your friends and family and put them together to make one large paper quilt. You could also make several quilt squares yourself and attach those together. There's a provided template with PDF images of different quilt square patterns, like the ones that we discussed in this presentation. That might be helpful when you're brainstorming. You're also welcome to trace those images and use them on your quilt square. Here are some sample paper quilt squares that might help you in your brainstorming. The square on the left uses the flying geese quilt pattern. The square in the middle shows you what's possible if you choose to use just a piece of paper and some markers, colored pencils, or crayons. And the quilt square on the right uses the 9-patch pattern, and there's tons of ways you can mix that up. So give it a shot. We're excited to see what you come up with. Thank you for joining us for our January edition of Art Together at Home. We hope you enjoyed the program and made a great quilt square or multiple quilt squares. For more information about the Zimmerli Art Museum and our programs and exhibitions, please visit our website at zimmerli.rutgers.edu. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook to stay up to date with the latest news. We hope to see you again soon, either in person or virtually. Have a great day!